In week 3, we are going to look at dataset table and pivot table. So these are the intended learning outcomes. Work with data and information in tables. Then we are going to look at how we can make use of different functions and filters in different tables. After that, we will start creating pivot tables and pivot charts. Let's look at how we can create tables for a set of data. Exploring data is always the key in many business strategies. Excel is an excellent tool for analyzing large amounts of data and presenting it in a way that can be understood. Datasets are named collections of related sets of information from which the user can understand the data and make good decisions. Data integrity is always very important concept because it protects the data and present it in such a way that you can feel confident that the decision you make are based on a valid data. Data tables have many advantages over the rows and columns of an Excel spreadsheet. Data tables provide context for the data by arranging them in a meaningful way. For example, by converting data into a table, you can gain additional methods for analyzing and manipulating the data, which will be discussed in the following slides. Data table give you flexibility in the way that you can use data, and they are scalable, making it easy to add more data in rows and columns that will automatically be included in the data table. Formatting and formula references will also automatically adjusted as more data are added to the data table. On this slide, it shows a print screen of a table that created. You can see there is table name, and we are on the design tab, which you can do a bunch of different things. At a later time, if you decide you want the data convert back to a range, you can use the convert to range option on the design tab, which is this one here, to remove the functionality of a data table. You can also specify criteria for hiding records from view in the dataset using filters. Filtering can be done on a range of data or an Excel table. The standard filter will display values in the field with checkboxes so that you can toggle the option on or off. You can also apply filtering criteria to multiple fields. Apart from normal filtering, there is another type of filter called the advanced filter. The advanced filter features makes it easier to view the criteria used for filtering the data table. Some rules exist for setting up advanced filters. The top row with field headings must be identical to the table. The headings can be copied and pasted from the data table. Criteria can then be set in one or more of the cells below the field names. For example, like this. Notice that the field filters arrows are gone from the data table because the advanced filter has been applied and only hotel customers are shown in the filtered data table. Now let's move on to have the demonstration. So please open the week 3 demo file. You can have a look at the document as well. So this is the demonstration Excel file. Looking at the background first. Imagine you're working as a part-time at Simply Fun Company, which is a party organizer which provides catering services. And the owner wants you to analyze the data collected over these few years. So you are given some random sample of the data for initial analysis. As said before, it is always a good practice to save a backup copy. So we will select all the data, Control-C to copy, and then paste it on a new worksheet. And we will call this new worksheet data backup. Go back to the data worksheets. You might want to press Escape button on your keyboard to remove the copy. And then we will insert 10 rows above our dataset right now. So highlight row 1 to row 10, right-click Insert. So now your dataset starts from row 11. We are going to create a data table through A11 to G211. One very quick, easy way to select all data in the dataset is to press Ctrl-A. So you have selected the entire set of data. Now you can go to Insert, Table. Make sure you check the range is correct, as well as having this checkbox, My Table has headers, checked, and then click OK. Right now we have already created the table, and we are on the Design tab of the Table Tools. We would like to change the table name to Party Data. So on the top left-hand corner, in the table name box, change the table name to Party Data. Then press Enter. At this time, you can actually select another table styles for your own preference. And then in column H, sorry, there is a typo on the document. It should be H11, type Party Fee. And then we will use VLOOKUP function to look up how much it will cost based on the fee table, the very last worksheets. I have already created a table, set a range for it already. So you can see it is called fee table. Using VLOOKUP function, based on the party size, we are looking at the fee table in the table array. And in the second column in the fee table, it has the party fee. There is no exact match, so we can either type true or just omit the range lookup. We want to format this table by adding currency or a dollar sign in front. Then we are going to insert a new record. So scroll all the way down, and then in row 212, we type in the new record according to the document. Depending on different Excel settings, it could be month first, it could be date first. So in my case, it should be month first. And as you can see, you don't even need to type in the formula for party fee. And you can also notice that the table range is now from A12 or A11 all the way to H212. Now we are going to add filter to our table. Click on the filter arrows. We would like to display the record for party size of 15. So click on the drop-down arrow and remove all the checkboxes and select 15 only. Now it should show 12 records. Then you can clear all the filters from party size. And you can also use another filter to show the records of year 2017 only. And there at the bottom, you can see we have 38 records. Now we move on to create advanced filter. First of all, we remove all filter. Then we highlight A11 to H11. Copy them and paste it in row 1. Then in F2, we type in business. We are going to do an advanced filter to filter the records which the customer type business. Now go to Data tab, and then under the Sort and Filter group, you can see something called Advanced. Click on that. And then in the list range, we select the whole table. So go all the way from A11 down to H212. So you can see it sets party data all. And then we set the criteria range. And the criteria range is from B1 to G2 to H2. B1 to H2. Make sure on top you select filter the list in place. Then click OK. Now you have 90 records and they are all business customer type. Let's add one more criteria. So the district, apart from having business customer, we would like to add the district at Mongkok. And also for food order over 2,000. Then we do the same process again, go to advanced, making sure the list range is from A11 to H212, and then the criteria range is from B1 to H2, then click OK. Now you should see there are totally 14 records filtered. The advantage of using advanced filter is that we can actually incorporate the OR concepts. So when we are filtering in our previous demonstration, all these criteria are in the AND condition. So the food order has to be over 2,000 and the customer type has to be business and the customer has to be in Mongkok. So they are all fulfilling these AND criteria. But then for advanced filter, we can also address the OR condition. So in D3, we are going to change the party size, for example, 15. And we would like to look at the local customer. So these two have the AND condition. These three have the AND condition, but row 2 and row 3 are in the OR condition. And then let's go to advanced and see how many records we can get this time. For the criteria range, now it covers from B1 to H3. Then click OK. Now you can see we have 17 records filtered. So let's jump back to the slide. After we look at filter and advanced filter, let's see how we can make use of slicer to do filtering. When using Slicer, you can interactively filter data in pivot table, Excel table, query tables, and other data table. Select a cell in the data table and then click Slicer on the Insert tab to display the Insert Slicer dialog box. And then after that, you'll be able to choose which particular field you want to add the slicer. One of the advantages of using Slicer is that you can see at a glance exactly what criteria are used and select different criteria for filtering up from the slicer. Multiple criteria can be selected by pressing Ctrl and clicking additional choices on the slicer. You can also insert slicer for additional fields and more finely tune your filter criteria. So let's jump back to the demo file and have a look at how we can make use of Slicer. So far we have already finished step 14, and now we move on to step 15 on the document. If you still have any filter, what you need to do is, while you are on the Data tab, click Clear to clear all the filter. And then click on any cell in the table, and then go to the Insert tab, and select Slicer in the Filters group. We are going to select Customer Type, click OK. There we have a slicer for customer type. Again, you can always adjust the size of your slicer, and on top of that, you can always select your preferred slicer style. Right now, on the slicer heading or the caption, it is Cust Type. I would like to change it to Customer Type. So right-click on Slicer, go to Slicer Settings, and then in this dialog box, remove Cust Type in the caption box and replace it with Customer Type. Then click OK. We are going to insert an other slicer. So again, click on any cell in the table, go to Insert tab again, select Slicer. This time, we are going to insert the district. Then click OK. Sometimes, if you have a longer list, you can actually set the list, if it is too long, in separate rows to be displayed on separate rows or columns. To do that, right-click on the slicer, select Size and Properties. Then you have this Format Slicer, and select Position and Layout. You can change the number of columns. For example, adding another column. You may now test your slicer by selecting Mixed Customer, which they are in Causeway Bay and Wan Chai. To select multiple items on Slicer, you can press the Control key. Let's jump back to the slides. When we aggregate data, we consolidate or summarize it. Using the subtotal function, you can consolidate data that have a filter applied. For example, you filter data to include only customers from your own country in a table. You know that the other country's customers are merely hidden from the view. And if you use normal functions like sum or average, the result will reflect even the hidden records. So the subtotal function can aggregate only the data displayed with the filter applied. So this is the syntax, of course, with the equal sign in front. Subtotal, function number, where function numbers could be in a range of 1 to 11 or 101 to 111 that specify the functions to use. And the reference would be the name range or the reference that you want to have the subtotal. These are the function numbers that we normally use. So 1 or 101 for average, 2 or 102 for count, so on and so forth. This is a print screen of how we can insert the subtotal function. And there you can see there will be some hints to give you some idea of what function number that you need to insert. Apart from using subtotal function, we can also use database function. Database function, as you can see here, allows us to analyze data for selected records in a database table. The data not meeting specified criteria will be filtered out, and there are 3 arguments: database, field, and criteria. So these are the very commonly used database function: dsum, daverage, dmax, dmean, and dcount. You can see these are actually very, very similar to the subtotal function. But then you need to set the field and the criteria. And I will show you how we can make use of this later on in the demonstration. And this is also another example of using the dmax. So here we have the data sets, which would be this range. And then here we have the field. Sorry for the mislocation of this. And then we have the criteria. We can make use of the advanced filtered criteria in here. This is another example of using database function. This time we are using dsum. Okay, so come back to the demonstration file. So far we have already finished step number 19 on the documents. We are going to finish step number 20 to 25. First of all, we would like to remove all the filters, like what you can see here. Click on these icons to remove all the filters. Before we actually apply the aggregation, I would like to insert the name of different range. So I will select the whole table first, and then go to Formulas, Create from Selection, and then select Top Row. And as you can see, we have a number of different named range. So now in B5, we are going to enter the headings of those information that we want to find. Overall average of food order in B5. Averaged, filtered average of food order in B6. Average party fee for TST. TST stands for Chim Sa Choy. Filtered average for party size in B9. You might want to bold these few cells as well as adjusting the column width of column B. And now we are going to insert functions to calculate the average. So for C5, we will simply use the normal average function. We want to look at the average of food order, so we type food order. Very simple. And you might want to format the cell to, for example, currency. And so as the rest of the other ones. And then filter average of food order. Let's say I am only interested in looking at the local customers. So in the slicer, for example, to make things quicker, I directly click on local. So now in this table, it only shows the customers which are local customer. And then now we will look at the subtotal function. Double click on this one average, and then we type food order for reference. As you can see, the two averages are different, simply because on the top one, it is the overall average, including all records in our table. And now this average is those filtered records. It's only for those who are now displaying. And while I continue to adjust my criteria and filter, you can also see how this average change. For example, I specifically select Causeway Bay. Now it changed again. Let's go to C8. In C8, we are going to insert average if function to calculate the average of party size in Chim Sa Choy. As you can see in the syntax in average if, we need to have range, criteria, and optionally average range. For the range now, we are going to make use of district because we are specifying Chim Sa Choy. So we type district. As you can see in these few steps here, now you know and understand why I add name for different range. And then we need to set criteria now. The criteria is Chimsacho. And finally, average range. We want to look at the party fee. So we type party fee. So this is the result. Now let's go ahead to look at how we can make use of database function, namely this particular one, the average function, to calculate average of party fee with our specified criteria in B1 to H3. So maybe let's remove these filter first. And then we type the average. And we will make use of our whole database. So we select all the way from A11 to H212, and it will show you party data all. Our field would be the party fee, but then make sure you have double quotation mark. After that, we will have the criteria, and the criteria will be like what I said, B1 to H3. So it's like this, and then press enter. One thing that you might have already noticed is that before I actually insert the function here, I need to make sure I have the whole database, I have the whole data sets now displaying. So I do not have any filter. So this would be the average party size with these criteria. So these are the things that we need to learn in dataset table. So far, we have already finished all step 1 to step 25 in the demonstration file. Now let's move on to have a look at pivot table. Pivot table are very powerful tools for data analysis, spotting trends, and making decisions. They are very interactive because we can extract, organize, and summarize data, as well as storing the results on a separate table. Whenever we talk about pivot table, we oftentimes we mention something related to data mining because it is a very good tool to do very simple BI and data mining. So data mining actually analyzes large volumes of data, uses advanced statistical techniques, and identify trends and patterns. Pivot table in Excel has these interactive features, data mining features, so that we always use pivot table to do simple data mining and business intelligence things in Excel. We often say pivot tables are very, very dynamic. It is because the data can be rearranged to analyze them from different viewpoints. Details can also be expanded or collapsed. Data can be organized and grouped differently. Rows and columns categories can always be switched. Before we actually insert the pivot table, we always need to get the data well prepared. The source data should be arranged with columns heading for each field and the rows for each record, and data should be isolated from other cells. Any subtotals or summary functions in the dataset should be removed. Once the data are organized, pivot tables are created by selecting the datasets and location for the pivot table. You can create the pivot table on a separate worksheet, which is always recommended, or at a location on the same worksheet as the data. Pivot table will be blank until you add grouping and summarization to the data. On this slide, it shows very quickly how we can make use of quick analysis tables to insert pivot table. But then oftentimes we use another way. That is just simply selecting the data set and then go to Insert tab and then select Pivot Table, which is a much easier way. On this slide, it shows how we can customize our pivot table. On the right-hand side on Excel, we have Pivot Table Field Panes, that it contains all the fields in our data sets. And then at the bottom right-hand corner, we have 4 boxes, filters, columns, rows, and values, which they will show where after we have selected different fields and put it here, the report area will automatically show the results. So this is the results. And these are some pivot table variables, including the grouping and summary variables. As you begin to build the pivot table, consider the type of data you will be using. Grouping variables categorize or group data for comparison. For example, you may want to compare last year's sales to this year's sales. Then you will group each year's sales together. Place grouping variables on top or left side of the pivot table. For summary variables, they perform aggregate functions such as summing, counting, and averaging. To continue with the example of comparing last year's sales to this year's sales, the summary could include a sum of sales each month, an average for each month, and then totals for the years. Summary variables should be placed at the bottom or right-hand side of the pivot table. On this slide, it shows how you can make use of grouping to group different dates. To add a field as a row, in the Choose Fields to Add to Report section, we do one of the followings by clicking on the Fields checkbox or directly dragging the field and drop it in the row or column area, or right-clicking on Name, Field Name, and then select Add to Row Labels or Column Labels. To add a value, in the Choose Field to Add to Report section, do one of these. Click the field checkbox or drag the field and drop it in the values area, or again right-click the field name and select Add to Values. To add a column, you do the same like what you do for row. So this is another print screen that's when you are working on the pivot table, this is how it looks like. To remove a field, you may either click on the field name in the drag fields between the areas below the section and select Remove Field, or deselect the checkbox next to the field name, or drag the field name in the drag fields between the areas below the section outside the pivot table field task pane. One thing that you need to pay attention is that pivot tables do not automatically update. If you make changes after you have if you make changes to the data source after you create the pivot table will not update or refresh. You need to explicitly refresh the pivot table, or most of the cases you need to recreate the pivot table. Pivot tables always display statistical data for each category. However, the pivot table can be filtered to show a subset of results. To create filters to the pivot table, you can click the filter arrow or select the value for each of the filter that is spaced. To permanently remove a filter, remove it from the filter area. So this is an example of the filter that you have something here and then the filter is always on top. Apart from having filters in the filter box, you can always filter your data or values as well. As you can see, there are drop-down arrows. Similar to the data table that we just played around, we can also insert slice or slicer to a pivot table. And the slices actually looks exactly the same like what we saw before. A calculated field is actually something that user defined, and it is not part of the original data set. A calculated field's value is based on calculating using values of the original data sets. So this is how we can insert a calculated field. First of all, you need to name the field, and then you can make use of different fields that you have in your data set and use it in the formula. After you have created the calculated field, there are some built-in custom calculations that can be applied to display the relationship between the values in rows and columns in the pivot tables. When you finish, you can actually, like other situation, change the pivot table style. Let's look at the pivot chart before we go back to do the demonstration file. Similar to pivot table, pivot chart is also another interactive way, but then this time it is showing the things in a graphical representation of the pivot table data. Changing the position of a field in the pivot table or pivot chart will change the corresponding object as well. So to create a pivot chart, simply click on the pivot table and then go to the Analyze tab, Tools group. You can insert different types of charts like what we normally do inserting charts. And we can move the chart to a particular chart sheets. And we can also customize our pivot charts, like what we normally do when we are dealing with normal charts. But one thing that you always need to remember is once your pivot table change, the pivot chart will also change accordingly. So now let's jump back to the demonstration. We are going to play around with pivot table. So here we have our Excel file. We will start creating pivot table in step 26. Select any data in the table, and then in the Design tab, we will select Summarize with Pivot Table. And then we would like to create this in a new worksheet. Make sure it sets party data, or if you're not confident enough, you can simply select the whole table again. And then click OK. Now we are on a new worksheet, and we need to rename this worksheet to Pivot Analysis. So on the right-hand side, we have these pivot table fields. Sometimes some students accidentally close this, like that. Don't worry. On top of the ribbon, make sure you are under Analyze tab of Pivot Table Tools. There is something called Field List under the Show group. Click on that, you will find the pivot table fields again. In the pivot table field area, we are going to click on the checkboxes to select those fields to be put in the pivot table. So we check on the customer type, the cust type, district, and then food order. As you can see, while we are clicking on that, on these fields, it has already put them into corresponding boxes, and our pivot table is created. And you might also notice how these values or data will change if I change the position. For example, I move district on top of customer. So our pivot table change. And you may also notice how our pivot table change if I drag the cust type to columns box. And then we replace district by date. And if you click on this expand the plus sign, you can see it is how it actually grouped the things together, grouped the date together. It may not be something you want, for example, this time I basically don't need month. So I click on one of the day and then go to group selection on top of our ribbon under the group. And then now you can see it is grouping in order of years, quarters, and months. I just don't want month, so I uncheck month. Anytime if you don't want to have the grouping, you can select ungroup. Now in B6, I go to Analyze tab and go to Field Settings. Because now I know they should be in monetary value. So in B6, I go to Field Settings and then I select Number Formats button and then I select Currency. Then click OK. As you can see, I have the grand total on the right-hand side in our report area. Let's say now I'm no longer interested in the grand total or the food order. So I uncheck that. And instead, I would like to insert a calculated field. So I am actually in step 32 right now. To insert a calculated field, again, make sure you are under the Analyze tab. And then you go to Fields, Items, and Sets under the Calculation groups. Select Calculated Field. We are going to insert a calculated field by showing food orders by party size. So first of all, we need to name the field. Let's call that food per person. And then in the formula, we are going to make use of the food order divided by the party size. So we remove the 0 and we double click food order / party size. Okay, so food order divided by party size. Then click OK. You don't always need to have a grand total. As you can see, because we're calculating the food order divided by party size, the grand total doesn't make a lot of sense. So we can remove the grand total. Go to Design, Grand Totals, Off for rows and columns. And now we also find some like divided by 0 error message. Probably it's because there was no mixed customer back then. What we can do is go back to the Analyze tab. On the top left-hand corner, click on the drop-down arrow of Options and select Options. We are going to check this checkbox for error values show. And I don't want to show anything, so I'll just check this, leave it blank. Then click OK. So those error message will be removed, and now you will only see for those problematic cells, it becomes a blank cell. And we are going to type the headings to make them more meaningful. In A3, we type food order by party size. In B3, we type customer types. And then in A4, quarters by year. As you can see, next to quarters by year, we have a drop-down arrow, which now we know that we can actually do some filtering. You might want to select the records of 2015 to 2018. So again, we unselect all and select the few years that we want to look at, 2015 to 18. And as you can see, the pivot tables data change. Now you can go to the Design tab and choose whatever style, pivot table style you are interested in. Next, we are going to add slicer to the pivot table. Before we do so, make sure you remove all the filters. So clear filter from yes. And then we simply want to do another filtering by filtering data from 2014 to 17. We are going to insert a slicer. Go to Analyze tab. And then under the filter, insert slicer. We are going to insert a slicer to filter party time. And as you can see, we have a very long party time option. So like last time, we are going to change the number of columns into 2. Right click, size and properties, and in format slicer, under layout, number of columns, change it to 2. At this point, you might want to adjust your slicer width. Don't forget, we only want to show the time from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. So 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. To select multiple items on slicer, again, you press the control button. Like this. Again, you can see how our pivot table updates. Finally, you might want to format your pivot table in bands and rows and change the report layout to tabular form. To do so, you click on the pivot table again and then go to Design. You can add bands to your pivot table. For example, if I add banded rows, it will appear like this for my pivot table style. You can also see how it looks different if you use another pivot table style. For example, this. So it is banded rows. You might also want to change it to tabular form. So go to Report Layout. Oh, sorry, it should be yeah, show in tabular form. Okay, so these are all the 42 steps in our demonstration. And that will also be the end of my video now. You might do the weekly lab exercise on your own. If you have any questions, please email me